Oh, Jesus Christ. This is really bad.
I can't believe this is happening, but Spyderco messed up another knife. Yikes. Welcome fellow seekers of steel. In today's video we'll transform my malfunctioning PM2 into a real showstopper, and on top of giving it fancy new looks, we'll also improve its function by fixing its terrible lock stick, solving the finger guard's bounce back issue, and giving it a hair-popping new edge. If you watch my channel, you probably know that I did not like my Spyderco PM2 for a couple of big reasons, and if you don't watch my channel, make sure to hit subscribe. So in a nutshell, this finger guard causes issues because it makes the knife bounce back from my finger every time the blade folds. Plus the compression lock itself also has a very serious sticking issue that makes a sound like it was broken every time I try to disengage it.
Oh, Jesus Christ. This is really bad.
On top of everything, Spyderco also shipped this knife with a very noticeable blam on the black DLC coding, which is very frustrating since this is actually a limited edition sprint run that was available through DLT trading only. Keyword was, meaning that replacing it is not an option, and to save my PM2 I have no other choice but to perform a life-saving knife surgery. So without further ado, let's sit down at the operating table, roll out the Spyderco shop mat and begin the procedure. As step 1, we need to strip our patient from their old clothes, and for this task I'm using Torx bits in 3 different sizes: T6 for the pocket clip, T8 for the standoff aka body screws, and T10 for the pivot. And thanks to my fantastic VHobby driver, this task is very easy. But now you should watch my hand carefully, because Spyderco's paramilitary lineup is kind of tricky to disassemble for 2 big reasons. First of all, they come with a so-called flare lanyard tube that is pressed across both the scales and the liners, which prevents their separation even after all the screws got removed. So to take my PM2 completely down, I have to pinch on the lock bar with one of my fingers and then rotate the scales away from each other, meanwhile the blade is wide open. For this reason I need to be very careful not to cut myself, but after the grip is twisted apart, I can now go ahead and disarm the knife by removing the blade. Then I turn my attention to the flare lanyard tube that goes through both the steel liners and the purple G10 scales. And separating these is hands down the most difficult part of the whole disassembly, because it requires a lot of force. However, it is also something that I need to do carefully, because if I apply too much pressure, I can bend either the steel liners or the tube, and if I screw this up, I won't be able to put the knife back together. This is why most people use a specialized tool for this task, but my hands are freakish strong, so I just simply rip it apart. After asserting my dominance, I separate the liners from the scales. The side with the compression lock snaps out easily, including the lanyard tube. Meanwhile, the back scale needs a little bit more motivation. However, the G10 around the rigid steel liners is flexible, so after a bit of a wrestling match, it decides to tap out. And now that the knife is completely taken apart, the first thing I'd like to do is to fix the lock stick issue by gently polishing up the lock bar's contact area with this inexpensive polishing stick that I got from a jewelry shop. Anyways, the important thing about this step is to use something with a super fine grit, because removing too much material might cause blade play, which would be a lot more serious issue. So my goal here is to polish up the parts ever so slightly, and if after the reassembly the lock stick is still there, I'll have to come back and try it again. And I'm kinda mad about this because lock stick is unfortunately a very common issue with recently made Spyderco knives. Meanwhile, my older models are completely free from this gimmick. So I would highly appreciate it if Spyderco could double down on their quality control, because we customers would really deserve a consistent smooth action for $300. And meanwhile I was talking, you probably noticed that I started to clean all the parts using Ballistol, which is my favorite oil for maintaining my knives and firearms. And of course I also deployed my tactical toothbrush to remove all the gunk from tight corners. And throughout the disassembly, I got an additional trick up my sleeve that I recommend trying, which is buffing up these phosphor bronze washers using the diamond stick, because it greatly improves the knife's action. So now that all the parts are squeaky clean, it's time for us to pop open my Worksharp Precision Adjust Professional Elite Pro Max Deluxe Edition and regrind the blade. I genuinely love this sharpener because it comes with guided rods that allow me to select and maintain the exact grind angle with each stone, especially if I combine it with my digital level box that spares me from all the guesswork. For this specific knife, I decided to go with a 17-degree polished edge, because in my experience CruWear performs really well with this geometry. And the reason why I prefer sharpening without the scales is because this step produces a lot of fine dust that would otherwise get into the knife's action, but this way I don't have to worry about it. And by the way, I highly recommend trying CruWear if you enjoy sharpening your own blades, since it takes an aggressive keen edge that cuts like a lightsaber. And every time I touch CruWear with my stones, the result is super satisfying. Especially if I have the patience to go through all the grits one by one, because this steel reacts incredibly well to abrasives and it also retains its sharpness for a really long time. And as you see, this edge is no exception, so I got an incredibly nice even grind on both sides. Normally, I would cut some paper to demonstrate my results, but in this case I took things one step further because this blade can effortlessly shave my arm under its own weight, which is just a couple of grams. So now that I look like a proper psycho, I'm ready to start a reassembly that includes a couple of extra parts. To leave the knife's shameful past completely behind, I wanted to give it a fresh start with some Toxic Storm Fatcarbon scales. This material is a super high quality carbon fiber, which was milled into this shape by Ripp's Garage Tech. Because of the precision milling, putting the knife back together is very easy. I just throw in the flare Lanyard tube and apply pressure like it was a piece of Lego. Then I can start installing the standoffs and the body screws on the bottom scale, which fixes the liner. Then I go ahead and place in one of the shiny polished phosphor bronze washers, and I lock it in place with the D-shaped side of the pivot and the T10 screw. However, before putting the blade back, I reach for some blue lube from Benchmade and leave a couple of tiny spots on the washer, and only then comes the blade and of course a tiny bit more lubrication. After this, I pop on the second washer, and the same way I open the knife, I need to carefully pinch on the compression lock with one of my fingers and rotate the scales back together. Then I insert every single screw starting from the pivot, moving toward the end of the handle, and throughout this step it is very important to tighten everything little by little with a so-called crisscross method, like I was changing tires on a car, for example. This way I can make sure that all my parts are seated properly and none of the pieces store any tension, which is key to achieve perfect blade centering and fidgety action all at the same time. Then, after everything is tightened gently, I can go ahead and make sure that my knife can open and close without any issues. This is the time when I check for blade play, and especially for lock stick, because if I find any problems at this point, I still have the opportunity to make adjustments.
Oh, Jesus Christ. This is really bad.
Unfortunately, in my case there was still one big issue, as the disgusting lock stick was still there, so I had to go back and polish the tolerance pieces and then repeat the reassembly all over again.
Because it's actually fucking rusty. That's why. The fucking stop pin.
Anyways, the good news is that after the second try, the knife turned out to be perfect. So now, to make these perfect results permanent, I reach for some blue Loctite and apply thread locker to every little screw one by one. Then, as a final touch, I install the pocket clip where I avoid using the thread locker, because I know it from experience that the super tiny T6 screw heads can strip easily if I glue them down. And as I'm done with the clip, the reassembly is technically done. However, after all this, the knife still has one big unresolved issue, since the blade is still bouncing back from my finger when I try to close it. So to fix this problem, we have to install one last accessory. This purple little thing is called CME, short for Compression Made Easy, and it was sent to me by Molly from OCD4EDC. So big thank you Molly for sending this out. The main purpose of this attachment is to convert Spyderco's compression lock into a more convenient button lock experience. But it's also a great fix for my specific issue, because it acts like a cover on top of the lock bar. So if you guys like this fix, make sure to check OCD4EDC, because their prices are awesome and they also have a large selection of colors. My CME attachment works with this super glue that came inside the package, including this instruction manual that explains everything. And I have to admit that I was a bit worried about this part, because I'm a big and clumsy guy with no dexterity in my hands. But eventually I could glue on my CME the very first try. So now I have to leave the knife alone for a couple of hours, because both the Loctite and the super glue need to dry. And boom, we are back the next morning and we can enjoy the result. Finally, Spyderco's all dumb manufacturing and design mistakes are now gone, and I get to have the PM2 experience that I was always looking for, because now there's literally nothing I could change on this knife that would make me like it better. I love the blade steel, I love the action, and I definitely love the looks. And after spending like 10 minutes admiring my creation, I have to say that this combination of green and yellow Fatcarbon became one of my big favorites. The pictures you see online absolutely don't do justice to this material, because the way it shimmers under light is simply magical. I'm also happy that I could buy these scales for this exact pocket knife, because the PM2 comes with an oversized handle compared to its relatively tiny blade, so swapping scales makes a big visual difference. And last but not least, I also like the way the CME attachment complements the Fatcarbon, because purple is also a quote-unquote toxic color. So to celebrate this brand new custom knife, I also made a pretty cool lanyard that fits the theme. If you also dig the outcome, definitely leave a like or tell me what you think about it in a comment below. And if you enjoy satisfying scale swap videos such as this one, you should click on this card to watch my previous upload when I upgraded my Para 3 with this pretty cool titanium grip. Thank you for sticking around all the way, and I'll see you in the next one.